Barry wanted. Then he walked away. Some say his wife advised against television. Others say he felt the project was beneath him. Whatever the reason, he was gone. Enter William Shatner, bolder, more theatrical, magnetic. The entire soul of the SH before there were streaming wars, before Marvel dominated every screen, before the internet turned every fandom into a global army, there was one TV show that dared to imagine a future where humanity had reached for the stars. It premiered on September 8, 1966. The ratings were unimpressive. The budget was embarrassingly low. And yet, Star Trek, the original series, became one of the most influential pieces of science fiction ever made. But behind the transporter beams and the Vulcan salutes lies a story nobody talks about. These are 20 weird facts about Star Trek 1966 that you almost certainly didn't know. Number 1. Kirk was almost never the captain. Let's start with the man who almost wasn't there at all. When Gene Roddenberry pitched Star Trek to NBC, he didn't have William Shatner in mind. The network was already sold on Jeffrey Hunter, the Hollywood star who had played Jesus Christ in King of Kings. Hunter filmed the original pilot as Captain Christopher Pike. He was serious, brooding, and philosophical. Everything Roddenberry changed the moment he stepped onto that bridge. Tragically, Hunter died just 3 years later, aged 42, never knowing what Star Trek became. So if Captain Kirk almost didn't exist, then what about the character who defined Star Trek even more than Kirk ever could? Number 2. Spock was supposed to have red skin. The Spock we know almost looked very, very different. Roddenberry's original concept notes described Spock with reddish, almost satanic-looking skin, unsettling, otherworldly, a creature from another world. Early design sketches leaned hard into this demonic visual. Then reality intervened, black and white television. In 1966, most American households still watched in black and white. Red skin would show up dark, almost black, sending completely the wrong visual message. So they shifted to a greenish-yellow tint, subtle enough to suggest alienness but light enough to read on monochrome screens. The irony? When the show aired in color, the tint was so subtle most viewers didn't notice it at all. But the pointy ears carried the weight. And the rest, as they say, is history. But changing Spock's appearance was just the beginning. Because one of the show's most iconic inventions wasn't planned at all, it was a last-minute fix to a much bigger problem. Number 3. The transporter was invented to save money. Ask any Star Trek fan what their favorite piece of technology from the show is, and there's a good chance they'll say the transporter. The ability to disassemble a human being at the molecular level and reassemble them somewhere else, it's one of the most audacious ideas in science fiction. But here's the secret Gene Roddenberry would probably prefer you didn't know: the transporter wasn't born from visionary storytelling. It was born from a budget crisis. The original plan was to show the crew of the Enterprise traveling to planets the old-fashioned way via shuttlecraft. Land the ship, show the descent, show the approach. It would have looked spectacular. It also would have cost a spectacular amount of money that the show simply did not have. The production team needed a cheaper alternative, and fast. The solution they came up with was the transporter, a special effect created by filming sparkling dust dropped in front of a dark background and then reversing the footage. Total cost, a fraction of what filming a shuttle landing would have required. What started as a cost-cutting measure became one of the defining icons of the entire franchise. Today, physicists debate whether teleportation could ever be real. Scientists at universities run experiments inspired by the concept. All of it traces back to a production team that couldn't afford to build a shuttle. And if something as legendary as the transporter came from a budget crisis, wait until you hear what the network thought of the entire show at the start. Number 4. NBC rejected the original pilot as too cerebral. Most shows get one chance with a network. Star Trek got something almost unheard of, a second chance, but only after being told its first pilot was fundamentally wrong. The original pilot, The Cage, was submitted to NBC in 1965. The verdict was brutal. Too cerebral. Too slow. Not enough action. The female first officer, played by Majel Barrett, was apparently too much for executives of the era to accept. NBC rejected it outright. But they commissioned a second pilot, almost unprecedented. Roddenberry went back to the drawing board. Out went number 1. In came Kirk, Spock, in a livelier, action-forward tone. But Roddenberry didn't waste the cage. He later repackaged its footage into a 2-part episode called The Menagerie, the only Star Trek episode to win a Hugo Award. The rejected pilot became award-winning television. But even after nearly being rejected, Star Trek pushed boundaries in ways no one expected. And one actress almost walked away before realizing just how important her role really was. Number 5. Nichelle Nichols was convinced to stay by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1960s American television. Nichelle Nichols was doing something radical just by showing up to work. As Lieutenant Uhura, she was one of the first black women in a major, non-subservient role on mainstream TV. She had authority. She was essential. But after the first season, she was ready to quit. Broadway was calling. She submitted her resignation to Roddenberry. Then she attended an NAACP event and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked to meet her. King told her Uhura was a symbol. That for the first time, young black children could see someone who looked like them as a professional, an officer, a person of dignity at the highest levels of human achievement. She withdrew her resignation the next day. She later called that conversation one of the most defining moments of her life. Number 6. Leonard Nimoy was deeply uncertain about place. Eyeing Spock today, Nimoy and Spock are synonymous. But in the early days of production, Nimoy wasn't sure the character would work or whether he even wanted to play it. His concern was the ears. The pointed ears, the greenish skin, the alien features. He worried it would make Spock look like a monster. A freakish villain rather than a sympathetic hero. He feared being typecast, reduced to a novelty act in a rubber costume. He also struggled with the emotional flatness the role demanded. Nimoy was a trained, expressive actor. Playing a being who suppressed all emotion required him to completely rewire his instincts. What changed everything was the audience. Viewers didn't see a monster, they saw depth beneath the stoicism, warmth beneath the logic. Nimoy later wrote 2 autobiographies. The first, I Am Not Spock. The second, I Am Spock. The journey between those 2 titles tells you everything. Number 7. The Interracial Kiss almost didn't make it to air on November 22, 1968. Kirk and Uhura shared a kiss widely cited as one of the first interracial kisses ever broadcast on American primetime television. What you might not know is how hard the network fought to prevent it. NBC demanded the scene be rewritten so the kiss was forced, compelled by telekinetic aliens, not chosen by the characters. The idea was to give Southern affiliates a way to dismiss it. It wasn't a real kiss, it was alien mind control. But Shatner and Nichols had other ideas. They deliberately flubbed the takes where they kept their heads apart, forcing the director to use the take where they turned toward each other. The network got its disclaimer. The actors got their moment. Nichols later recalled a letter from a white Southerner who said that moment had made him question everything he believed. One kiss. On a science fiction show. Changed a man's life. Number 8. The show was saved twice by fan campaigns. Star Trek was never a massive ratings hit. After the first season, NBC began making noise about cancellation. After the second, the noise got louder. What happened next had no real precedent in television history. Fans organized. Estimates suggest over 1 million pieces of correspondence flooded NBC's offices across the 2 campaigns. Petitions circulated on college campuses. Fans marched outside NBC's headquarters. For a fanbase with no internet, no social media, and no digital infrastructure, it was an extraordinary act of collective will. It worked twice. NBC renewed the show for a 3rd season, even making a public announcement at a convention. One of the first times in history that audience pressure had visibly reversed a network's cancellation decision. The 3rd season was the weakest, underfunded, buried in a late-night Friday timeslot. The show was finally cancelled in 1969. But that third season gave it the episode count it needed to enter syndication. And that changed everything. Number 9. The Enterprise model was never finished on the underside. The USS Enterprise. NCC 1701. One of the most recognized spacecraft in all of fiction. But the original filming model had a secret the cameras were never supposed to reveal. The 11-foot model was meticulously detailed, but only on the sides that faced the camera. The visible hull, the nacelles, the saucers section carefully crafted and painted. The underside? Left largely unfinished. Bare, rough, unpainted in sections. The reasoning was simple: every shot was composed from above or the side. There was no budget or reason to finish surfaces the audience would never see. The original model now sits in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. If you ever managed to look underneath, you'd be staring at the unfinished underside of one of the most famous vehicles in the history of storytelling. Number 10. Beam me up. Scotty was never actually said. This one is almost painful, because it feels like it has to be wrong. Beam me up, Scotty is one of the most quoted phrases in pop culture. It's been on t-shirts, bumper stickers, and greeting cards for 50 years. It was even uttered by astronauts aboard the International Space Station when James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty, passed away. And yet, the exact phrase "beam me up, Scotty" does not appear anywhere in the original series. Not once. What Kirk actually says, in various episodes, is things like "beam us up, Scotty, Scotty, beam me up," or simply "Enterprise, beam me up." Close variations, endlessly. But the precise combination of words that became the cultural touchstone? Never spoken. This phenomenon, where the cultural memory of a quote diverges from what was actually said, is surprisingly common. Play it again. Sam was never said in Casablanca. Elementary, my dear Watson never appeared in Conan Doyle's original stories. Luke, I am your father isn't quite right either. Darth Vader actually says, "No, I am your father." But the Star Trek case is particularly striking, because the misquote became more famous than any actual quote from the show. Language takes on a life of its own, and sometimes, the story we tell about something matters more than the thing itself. And once you realize how much of Star Trek exists in our imagination, wait until you see how much of what you saw on screen wasn't original at all. Number 11. Most alien costumes were recycled from other shows. Star Trek was set in a universe teeming with alien civilizations. Week after week, the Enterprise crew encountered beings from strange worlds, creatures with exotic fashions, unusual armor, and bizarre ceremonial dress. The wardrobe department must have been extraordinarily creative. They were. But they were also extraordinarily resourceful, because much of what appeared on screen as alien clothing was actually human clothing borrowed, stolen, or repurposed from the studio's existing costume archives. Hollywood studios in the 1960s maintained enormous costume warehouses, the accumulated wardrobe of decades of film and television production. Star Trek's